ultimately, when we look at how the human system is constructed, we are largely microbes, right? So we have more microbes in human cells, with way more microbe genetics than human genetics. Microbes produce more than half of all the compounds in our body that we need to function on a day-to-day basis. So we are a complex and beautiful microbial construct, right? We are, as I refer to it, a walking, talking rainforest. We are this complex ecosystem, and all of it has to work together to perpetuate the health of the whole. So imagine that we are an amazing microbial construct, and we've put this microbial construct in an antimicrobial world, right? So the world we live in today is essentially an anti-human world. It works against our biology in almost every facet of what we do, right? And the reason for that, I don't think it's necessarily egregious. I think what it is that we didn't really understand that this microbial world existed until recently. And so most of the things we've developed around us, the things we eat, the things we wear, the things we put on us, things we breathe, everything has never been tested in terms of what it does to the microbes, right? And the microbiome.
Welcome to Harmonic Alignment,
a podcast that explores the new frontier of energy medicine,
bridging the gap between Western medicine and quantum physics,
giving you easy and practical solutions.
Guided by
me, Dr. Larisa Sharipova,
and me, Priscilla Koblenz. Join us on a journey discovering your harmonic alignment. On today's episode of Harmonic Alignment, we have truly an extraordinary guest, an amazing teacher, a person who can make gut health make sense. Microbiologist Kiran Krishnan, a true gut health pioneer, connects with Dr. Larisa Sharipova, giving us the latest in science and our understanding of gut biome and microbiome health of the skin. He will give us permission to play in the dirt and tell us about SivCare, the latest product for your skin's microbiome. Reserve your spot today on the Tuscany Transformation Retreat, June 15th through the 21st, 2025. Reconnect with your inner beauty, power, and abundance. Come join Dr. Larisa Sharipova and myself, Priscilla Koblenz, for 6 nights and 5 full days in the beautiful Tuscan countryside. We'll be staying at a villa that has a gorgeous swimming pool and hot tub, a Turkish bath, as well as this amazing yoga studio overlooking the olive trees and the vineyards. We'll offer daily yoga, meditation, breath work, sound healing, spa treatments, a Tuscan bike ride, a pasta cooking class, olive oil and wine tastings, as well as amazing, amazing food. For more detailed itinerary, check out our website and reserve your spot today. We've got 9 spots available.
Krishnan, welcome to our podcast, Harmonic Alignment, and I'm so glad to have you with us today. And you are a microbiologist, expert in microbiome, and also a product developer. So let's dive deep in everything about microbiome. I know it wasn't my favorite subject in medical school, and I don't think everybody loves microbiology, because it's so complicated and with all these crazy names of the bacteria. But I know that it's very important for our health, and I wish they teach us not only pathological microbes that we should be aware, but also a good bacteria. So my question first, how you become a microbiologist? What inspired you to learn more about those small things?
Thank you for having me. I appreciate the opportunity to be here. My dad is a microelectronics engineer, and my mom is a medical doctor. So she has the biological science component. My dad has a systems engineering kind of mindset. And I think I got a little bit of mix of both. So one of my passions has always been systems that affect the world around us, our body, and so on. So I was very interested in quantum physics and the physics of the very smallest things, the quanta. And then in biology, the relevant component to that is microbiology, which is the biology of the smallest things, right? And my view has always been it's the things that we can't see, the smallest format of our either biology or reality that affects us in the most profound ways. And so I was always really curious and fascinated about things that I couldn't see, but I knew were affecting me. So I was either going to study physics and quantum mechanics or microbiology. I don't like math as much as I like biology, so I decided to go the microbiology route. And what's interesting about that is as I started studying microbiology and looked at what kind of career I want to have in the world of microbiology, what you mentioned earlier was actually really relevant because so much of the study of microbiology is either A, around industry, or B, around microbes that infect you and cause disease, right? There was a interview that I did for US News and World Report a number of years ago, and they had asked me to estimate what percentage of microbes that we've discovered are actually pathogenic. And through my research work on that, I figured at best it's around 0.1%, which means that 99.9% of all microbes that we've discovered are either benign or beneficial in some way, right? So why do we put so much focus on the 0.1% and then create whole systems and all that of trying to deal with the 0.1%, right? Everything from cleaners and sterilizers and this, that, and the other. When really one of the best ways to control the 0.1% is to allow the 99.9% to flourish. And so it became really interesting to me to study microbiology as a system, as an ecosystem, if you will, and how that relates to our health. So the world of the microbiome was the perfect entry for me that kind of satisfied a lot of things. One thing I do a lot is this kind of teaching and explaining and lectures and all that. And funny enough, what you described earlier about microbiology being a subject that you didn't like in medical school, and one of my first jobs at university was teaching or tutoring microbiology to nursing students, medical students, and so on. Because for me, it always made sense and it always like fit the way my mind thinks. And so I found ways to explain it in a way that it made sense to them and they understood it. And they would always say like, oh, why can't my professor just explain it this way, you know? And I said, well, maybe I have a knack for explaining this. So I need to find a career or create a career that I can do this. So that's how I ended up here.
Wow, fascinating. I wish I would have a tutor like you back then. So speaking of microbiome, probably a lot of people heard by now what's microbiome, but if people who don't know exactly what's microbiome is and how it's affect our health, so let's start from the beginning.
So the microbiome is defined as the totality of microbes in all their genetic elements, right? So what does that mean? That basically means that it's all the microbes that live in and on us. These are bacteria, viruses, fungi, amoebas, all kinds of things. Predominantly bacteria. Bacteria make up the largest proportion of microbes that live in us, but they're not the only ones. Now, with the microbiome, it's not just the bacteria and the microbes, it's also their genetic elements, all the genes that they provide to us. And that's a really important part of why they are so important to us and our overall function. So to put it into perspective, there was something called a Human Genome Project a number of decades ago, right? And I was actually still at university while this was going on. And one of the biochemistry labs I worked in was part of the Human Genome Project. So the goal there was to take the human genome, genetics we have in our chromosomes, and then sequence the entire human genome with the hypothesis that every disease would have a gene, right? There's going to be a heart disease gene, a diabetes gene, an Alzheimer's gene, and so on. And when we find the gene, maybe we'll find a way of affecting the gene to curb the disease. It was estimated, I remember back then, that the human genome would likely have over 250,000 genes because we're so complex, right? We have a lot of biology and chemistry that occurs on a day-to-day basis, so we have to have a very complex genome. As it turns out, most of our genetics are junk sequences that don't code for anything. We have somewhere around 21,000 genes. And it may still sound like a lot to people who are not familiar with genetics, but an earthworm has almost 30,000 genes, right? So we're less sophisticated than an earthworm is in terms of our genome. So that created a little bit of a confusion and conundrum because the question was, how is it that we're so sophisticated, right? How do we make all of these molecules and proteins and all this metabolic byproducts? How are we so sophisticated? Our brains are so sophisticated, right? As it turns out, the microbiome affords us over 2.5 million genes, right? We have 150 times more genetic material in our body from microbes than we do from the human genome. So much of our basic functionality and our adaptability and our resilience in terms of how we function, how we live, is afforded to us by the microbes. And if the microbes get disarrayed or damaged or reduced in some way, it compromises our basic function. And that's where disease can come from.
Mm-hmm. And research on microbiome is exploded for last probably 10 years, I would say.
Yeah.
And we find it now, but it's not only microbiome in the gut, we have microbiome in each organ in our body, right? Also, we can destroy our microbiome as well by different things. So can you tell us maybe about diet or lifestyle that can affect our microbiome?
Ultimately, when we look at how the human system is constructed, we are largely microbes, right? So we have more microbes in human cells, we have way more microbe genetics than human genetics. Microbes produce more than half of all the compounds in our body that we need to function on a day-to-day basis. So we are a complex and beautiful microbial construct, right? We are, as I refer to it, a walking, talking rainforest. We are this complex ecosystem, and all of it has to work together to perpetuate the health of the whole. So imagine that we are an amazing microbial construct, and we've put this microbial construct in an antimicrobial world, right? So the world we live in today is essentially an anti-human world. It works against our biology in almost every facet of what we do, right? And the reason for that, I don't think it's necessarily egregious. I think what it is that we didn't really understand that this microbial world existed until recently. And so most of the things we've developed around us, the things we eat, the things we wear, the things we put on us, things we breathe, everything has never been tested in terms of what it does to the microbes, right, and the microbiome. So going back to then the most basic and simplistic things that we do on a regular basis that has huge harmful effects on our microbiome. So number one, our diets, right? Our diets in the Western world are atrocious. You've got the standard American diet, the SAD diet. And to me, that leads to the standard American gut, the SAG. The standard American gut is a low diversity gut with very low keystone species and high levels of pathogens, right? That's to me the standard American gut. And we've done, 15, 20,000 gut microbiome tests. And the standard American diet being highly processed or ultra processed foods, high sugar intake, high simple carbohydrates, very low fiber intake, very low levels of polyphenols and fruits and vegetables, carotenoids, polyphenols, and so on, poor quality meats, and then really poor oxidized fats. And then a lot of it is calorically dense, chemical laden, and not real food, right? So that has a big impact on the microbiome because our microbiomes through the course of evolution were developed because of what we ate and because of how we ate things, right? So to give an analogy there, for example, if you look in the animal kingdom, so we know that chimpanzees are our closest biological cousins. They're almost 99% similar to humans in terms of genetics, right? We share 98 to 99% of our genes with chimpanzees. It's just a 1 or 2% that makes us physiologically look so different. But chimpanzees are not the most similar microbiomes to Homo sapiens. The animals that have the closest microbiomes to us are actually baboons. And even though we're drastically different to baboons genetically, our behaviors as a community are very similar to baboons. So baboons live in these tribes. They are nomadic. They are omnivorous. They eat lots of roots and tubers and seeds and nuts and insects. And they, of course, they hunt. They do also eat meat. Our behaviors as a species are very similar to baboons. We are nomadic. We travel a lot. We live on the land. We live up top. We live in different regions. So we pick up lots of different microbes, right? So the way we eat, the way we live, how we engage with nature was such a big part of how we developed our microbiome. And we don't do any of that anymore, right? We're eating food out of packages that are laced with Roundup and pesticides and, of course, antimicrobials and preservatives and have high caloric density and low nutritional value. And then on top of that, we also are not engaging with nature anymore. We live in relatively sterile environments. We're not in this constant contact with nature. So I think that in itself is a massive hit to our microbiome on a day-to-day basis. On top of that, we have very sterile environments in our homes. We don't get the right exposure. I'll give you an example of that. If you look at Finland geographically, the eastern part of Finland borders a lot of Russia, right? And there was a study because there's a town in Russia and a town in Finland that are not that far apart, maybe 100 kilometers apart. And yet the prevalence of allergies and asthma and immune dysfunctions in Finland was much higher than that town in Russia. So the Finnish government sponsored a study called the Finnish Allergy Study to understand what's the difference between those two communities that are geographically very similar that causes this huge discrepancy in immune function, right? And what they basically found was that in Finland, that people had their doors and windows closed and locked most of the time, and they sterilized their home environment quite a bit, right? That's the programming we have of clean, is like this chemical lemon smell all over the house, and we think that's clean. In Russia, they have the doors and windows open more. They have more animals coming in and out of the home, dogs and cats and so on. And they didn't sterilize their home the same way. So it's just that difference that completely changes what those people's microbiomes and immune systems function like. Now, to take it one step further, what they did in Finland that was fascinating is they said, okay, we're going to take half the daycares in the country or in a given region and add mud piles or dirt piles to it. And we're going to stipulate that the kids have to play in the dirt piles X number of times per week. And then they followed these kids for years. And what they found was the kids that played in the dirt piles versus the kids that didn't, the kids that did had much lower incidence rate of allergies, asthma, viral infections, and so on, compared to the kids that didn't, right? So it just underscores this basic idea that we came from the dirt, we evolved in the land, and we've removed ourselves from the land. So just thinking about those things alone, people can start to appreciate how our current modern lifestyle is completely working against our biology.
And we probably decrease a lot of number of species that we used to have because of that. As we know, it's very important for our overall health.
Diversity in the gut microbiome is one of the best predictors of longevity and overall health, right? And so the number of functional species is such a critical aspect. If you look at nomadic tribes or you look at hunter-gatherer tribes that still exist today, so these are tribes like in Papua New Guinea, the Hadza tribe in Tanzania, there's been a lot of microbiologists that have gone and lived with these tribes and studied them and understand their microbiome. What you tend to see is their diversity is 2.5 to 3 times more than ours is, right? In the US, we've lost so much diversity. Just to put it in context for people, you can find upwards of 600 viable species in the guts of somebody in Papua New Guinea or in Tanzania, versus in the US, it's around 150, right? So we've lost these microbes. And here's the scary thing about that is, remember in the beginning, I mentioned that the microbes provide us functionality. Without the microbes, we would cease to be able to do certain functions, which means like our organ systems provide a certain functionality. So it's not that big of a stretch to say when we lose certain microbes from our microbiome, we're losing functionality. It's no different than if I said to you, based on our behavior today, our kids will be born with just one kidney, right? And then those kids, their kids will be born with just one kidney and maybe half a spleen. People will be alarmed, like, what is happening to our organs, right? But that's exactly the same thing that's happening with the microbiome. We're not passing on a rich and diverse microbiome to the next generations. And so every generation is being born with more and more prevalence of disease, right? I think this is part of why you see spectrum disorders going through the roof. You see allergies among kids being an epidemic, right? You see cancers and heart disease and all that. Everything is going up, despite all our investment in medicine and research and all that. All of the diseases that we care about and are concerned about continue to go up because we're not paying enough attention to our microbes.
Yeah, speaking of kids and mothers, if a pregnant woman has good microbiome, she's gonna pass it to her offspring. And as I said, each organ in the body has its own microbiome. So let's talk women's health and how it's important for women's health and future generations as well.
Where you get the bulk of your microbiome is largely from your mom, hopefully, if you've passed through the birth canal. But we have to remember that somewhere around 35% of pregnancies are C-section as well. And in some cases, of course, they have to be because of medical complications, but a lot of it is elective, which is unfortunate, right? So the baby's not passing through the birth canal, getting exposed to the vaginal microbiome, which is changing as the woman goes further into pregnancy. The vaginal microbiome actually becomes more diverse and starts changing to give the baby the appropriate inoculum. But the other thing the baby's going to come in contact with during natural childbirth is fecal matter. You're going to get exposed to mom's bifidobacteria and a number of other good, very important species. And that becomes the baby's really important initial inoculum. If you're being born via C-section, you don't pick up many of those bacteria. In fact, you end up picking up a lot of microbes in the air and on the surfaces of the surgeon and other people around. So you get a lot more E. coli and streptococcus and all that early on instead of bifidobacteria early on, right? And so mom is in many ways a very critically important step in your inoculation. And it happens in utero. Even in utero, mom's immune cells will reach across her gut lining and bring beneficial bacteria to the amniotic fluid and expose the baby to it in utero itself, right? And then, of course, when you're born, passing through the birth canal, and then after you're born, that skin-to-skin contact, nursing, mom's milk can have upwards of 600 different species of bacteria in it. So if people aren't nursing enough, if they're being born through C-section, they're not getting the appropriate inoculum. And of course, we probably sterilize our babies too much, right? We sterilize all the areas around them because a lot of people are afraid of the baby getting sick. And I've gone to see countless friends' babies, and before you go to see the baby, they want you to put hand sanitizer on, right? Which is probably the last thing you should do because the baby needs exposure to everyone's microbes, the community's microbes. So we're missing a lot of that in the modern world. And so that makes it so hard to have a well-established microbiome from the beginning, right? And so a lot of kids then, not only are they not born and gain access to a robust microbiome early on, most kids by the age of 5 have gone through at least 4 courses of antibiotics, right? On top of not getting the best inoculum for their body and their microbiome, they're also using a lot of antibiotics that just knock down so many of the good bacteria and make it hard for the microbiome to recover.
Many mothers don't breastfeed because it's complicated, it's hard to do, and so in culture trained not to breastfeed, that's another issue for the kids.
It is. It is. And keep in mind, breast milk also contains about 200 different oligosaccharide prebiotics that are there specifically to seed the bacteria of the baby in the gut. And so you're missing the probiotics, you're missing the prebiotics, you're missing all the critical things in mom's breast milk, which is the only mammalian food that's been perfected by evolution. And it's difficult. It's inconvenient for a lot of women, especially if they have to go back to work. Then they're pumping all day long and trying to save all that. So it becomes really difficult. And unfortunately, a lot of the companies that make infant formula have mistakenly sent the message that infant formula is as good or maybe even better than breast milk because they fortify it with DHA and all that, right? So it's fortified and it's better, but there's nothing compares to breast milk in terms of importance postnatally for the baby's gut microbiome. Now, you had mentioned that, all your different regions of your body have different biomes, and that's absolutely true. So when we talk about a region of bacteria, we'll say microbiota. So for example, the microbiota of the skin, the microbiota of the mouth, the stomach, the small intestine, the large intestine, they're all different and they're all connected. The easiest way to think about the different microbiomes, as you would find in the gallbladder, in the liver, in the cerebral spinal fluid, in your eyeballs, right? All of these different systems have different types of microbes. And in fact, what's becoming clear is that the function of the organ is dictated by the microbial ecosystem in that organ, right? It's the microbes that dictate how the organ functions. A great common example of that is SIBO, right? The small intestine functions in a very particular way. The biggest emphasis of the small intestine is the digestive function, right? The breaking down and assimilation of nutrients into the body. When you change the microbes in the small intestine, when you get the shift from gram-positive to gram-negative and higher levels of things like E. coli and enterococcus and all that, it completely shifts how the small intestine functions, and it creates conditions like SIBO or IBS, right? So everything from the digestive capability, the absorption capability, peristaltic function, the movement of the bowels, all of that shifts and changes because the microbes in that space are different. The same thing happens on the skin. I've been lecturing a lot over the last year on leaky skin and the skin microbiome. We know the skin to be a very important barrier to prevent things from leaking through from the outside environment. We also don't want our skin to be red. We don't want it to be inflamed. We don't want to have pimples. We don't want to have wrinkles and hyperpigmentation and all that stuff, right? All those things we're conscious about. And as it turns out, all of those things are driven by a change in the skin microbiome. When the microbes on the skin change, it causes the skin to not function the way the skin is supposed to function. And you start getting a dismantling of the structure of the skin, which is where you could start to see the formation of lesions, like in the case of dermatitis or eczema or acne, or the formation of age-related symptoms like fine lines, wrinkles, hyperpigmentation, dryness, and so on. So that's the really important thing, is that each of these organ systems has its own unique microbiology, and all of the systems have to talk to each other and work with each other in order for all of it to function properly. So we have to become very cognizant of the different biomes in the body.
So let's talk about skin and gut connection. I know you have a lot of research and recently specializing in skin microbiome. So what affects skin microbiome? And also maybe it's affecting other organs as well, as you said, they're all communicating between each other. So let's talk about skin.
Okay, so let's look at the skin from the outside in, and then we'll talk about the impact that the gut has on the skin. So when you look at the outside of the skin, we've got upwards of 1,000 different microbial species that can live on the skin. We've got somewhere around 35-to-1 ratio of microbes to skin cells, right? So we can have around 1.5 trillion microbes that live on our skin. And the microbes that live on our face and neck are different than the microbes that live in dry parts of the skin, right? So the face and neck are oily regions that have a lot of anaerobic environment, meaning no oxygen because of the oil and the larger pores and things like that. So inside the pores can be a very anaerobic environment. So there's different types of bacteria than what may live on your arms, your lower back, your shoulders, and so on. The diversity on the body is much greater than the diversity on the face. And ultimately, the microbes on the skin maintain the structure and the appearance of the skin, right? When you start seeing aging associated symptoms on the skin, it is often triggered by a change in the microbiome of the skin. And age is associated with an ongoing pattern change on the skin microbiome, and then those changes are associated with the symptoms that we see of age. And so the skin microbiome is really important in allowing the skin to maintain its number one duty, which is to act as a barrier. Right? So the skin is supposed to be an impenetrable barrier that keeps things from going through and inside circulation. And it also keeps things from going out, especially moisture, right? So we're supposed to retain moisture on the skin by this fatty acid layer called the ceramide layer that maintains moisture from evaporating and escaping from the skin. And so the skin is a very dynamic layer. It's got multiple layers of cells, and the cells have to keep turning over. At the same time, we want collagen and elastin to be functioning properly to maintain the tightness of the skin and the integrity of the skin. We want fatty acids to be metabolized in the skin to maintain the pH of the skin. And then we also want a lot of the cells, the keratinocytes, the melanocytes, all to function to protect the skin. Melanocytes protect the skin, of course, from UV radiation. They produce melanin, the pigment that tries to absorb the UV radiation and reduce the oxidative damage. Keratinocytes affect the structure of the skin. If there's a break in the skin or an infection or something that damages the skin, the keratinocytes will produce keratin and keratin proteins in order to create a lattice that the skin can be built upon, right? All of those things are highly, highly dependent on the microbes that live on the skin to affect change. So we cannot overstate the importance of the skin microbiome in terms of function and appearance of the skin itself. Now, when we look at the gut-skin axis, right, the gut microbiome does have a measurable impact on the skin through a couple of mechanisms. Number one is nutrient absorption. So the skin in general builds from the inside out, right? The topmost layer of the skin, the stratum corneum, is mostly made up of dead cells. So the skin is being built from the inside out, which means that the nutrients that drive the building come from the inside out. So the gut has to be healthy in order to break down food adequately, absorb and assimilate the nutrients that are going to be important to the skin, right? Things like fatty acids and ceramides and amino acids and so on that all have to make their way to the skin to reform collagen, elastin fibers, to improve the fatty acid profile of the skin, all of those things. So your gut has to be healthy and has to be driving digestion effectively in order to nourish the skin, and most of that nourishment comes from the inside. Right. The second part of it is the ceramide layer. That's this fat layer that protects the skin from moisture loss and also protects the skin from toxins trying to go through. Ceramides are acquired from plants called phytoceramides. Your liver has to be able to take those phytoceramides and convert them into a form of ceramides that's important to your skin and then send that off to the skin. Now, remember, the liver doesn't have any access to the phytoceramides unless your digestive tract was able to break down the plant matter and release those phytoceramides for the liver to absorb. All of that requires microbes, right? So that's one way, the nourishing of the skin. That's one way the gut microbiome impacts the skin. The second way is through the immune system. Your skin is constantly being monitored, if you will, by your immune system, right? There's lots of peripheral immune cells that are floating around in that lower dermis area, looking at all the things that are coming through and sitting on your skin and making contact with your skin to try to figure out if it needs to attack it. We know that the majority of your immune system is in your gut, right? And so when your gut becomes dysfunctional, your immune system becomes dysfunctional and becomes very reactive and very inflammatory, which means that any sort of stimuli on the skin will trigger a pretty profound immune response because your gut and your immune system are dysfunctional, which means then your skin becomes much more susceptible to damage as a result of overaction of your immune system, right? So a lot of the people with redness or eczema or psoriasis or sensitive skin, even acne, all of those red inflammatory-like conditions, those are all because your immune system tends to be overreacting to stimulus that's on your skin. Your skin microbiome can modulate that effect and reduce the inflammation, but you have to have a healthy skin microbiome, right? So if you don't have a healthy skin microbiome, not only are you causing more triggers because of the presence of pathogens and toxins and so on, but now your immune system is going to overreact to it, and your microbes on the skin cannot dampen that effect, right? So there's a lot of connections here.
And unfortunately, dermatologists and all skin specialists, they treat skin, not even looking that it might be immune system or gut.
Absolutely. I mean, if you look at, for example, acne, right? There's 52 published studies on acne and diet. What those studies show clearly is that the vast majority of people, if they reduce or eliminate dairy and reduce or eliminate gluten, that in itself can be effective enough to clear up their acne, right? So then you go, well, why is it that something we eat has that kind of effect on the skin? Well, it's because what you eat, if it's inflammatory, it's going to cause an inflammatory response in the lining of your gut, which makes your gut leaky and dismantles the gut microbiome. A leaky gut disrupts your immune response as well. And then a leaky gut can create systemic inflammation in areas like your skin, which then changes the microbiome of your skin. So it becomes a self-perpetuating problem. It is unfortunate that dermatologists are not yet understanding or on top of the component of skin microbiome and its role in skin health. But, you know, it's not that different from gastroenterologists still not understanding anything about the gut microbiome. They're not incentivized that way, right? So I've spoken to a few gastroenterologists because you would think those are the people that would be the most knowledgeable about the human microbiome because that's their world of study is the gut. But they're arguably some of the least educated because in their world, their incentives are for surgery and they couldn't be bothered about it, right? So.
Let's continue with the skin. So what's affected skin and also how we can improve the skin microbiome? Do we need to fix the gut to improve skin, or do we need to fix the skin to improve the gut? Or vice versa?
It's both. And we've tested this unofficially with a number of aesthetic clinics, for example. And what we find is that when you fix the gut and the skin at the same time, that's where you get the most profound effects. So of course, fixing the gut is about diversifying your diet, adding in more fiber, getting more prebiotics, eating cleaner food, not going to the ultra processed foods all the time, eating both adequate nutrition, but lower caloric intake is also beneficial, right? Generally. And then for the skin, again, avoiding dairy and gluten can be very impactful for the skin. Now, how do you affect the skin microbiome? Well, the skin microbiome is heavily influenced by all the things, of course, we put on our skin. So the soaps, the toners, the moisturizers, the deodorant, all of the things that we use on a day-to-day basis, we want to check them and try to get the cleanest version of all of those personal care products, right? I've worked for a few years now on improving my deodorant and my lotion, trying to get the cleanest version that works for my biology. Fortunately, I've been able to find things that work well for me, but people need to undertake that, right? Because that everything we put on the skin has a capability of impacting your skin microbiome. On top of that, we also wanted to find transient microbes that jump on the skin for a period of time. They affect the skin microbiome, they affect the immune response to the skin in a positive way, and thereby can rebalance and rebuild a skin microbiome in a relatively short amount of time. So we created this product called Civ, which I'll show you here. It is the first biome balancing serum. It is a bacillus endospore-based product. And what we're finding is that the spores, when they are present on the skin, can have a profound effect on dramatically reducing problematic microbes and increasing beneficial microbes, at the same time modulating immune response. So you're not getting too harsh of an immune response on your skin, right? So Civ works incredibly well. We've done a few studies on aging, lots of case studies on inflammation and acne. And then we also did an inflammation acne study with 317 subjects, and we see amazing results with the product.
Do you need to use it for a long time or consistently use it to have that effect? Or...
Yeah, it's best to use it on an ongoing basis. In the beginning, as you're trying to fix or control something, it's good to use it every day, once a day, either in the evening or the morning. That part doesn't really matter. But once you fix the issues that you're dealing with, you can likely go towards a maintenance program where your frequency of use may go down to 3 times a week, for example. A little bit goes a long way with Civ. You're really just, after you clean your face and before you put on lotion, you're just putting 1 drop on each side of the face, and then you rub it in to that half of the face and so on. And then it makes a profound difference in as little as 10 days. So we have a lot of case studies and before and afters and all that. Many of those saw profound changes in 10 to 14 days on their skin.
Oh, great. So where people can find the product or more information, how it can be beneficial for them?
Yeah, so on Instagram, they can look at the page for Civ. It's at CivCare. So SIVCARE. If you want to go to the website to check out the product, and you can get it there as well, it's www.civcare.com. And then if you follow me as well on Instagram, Kiran Biome, I post a lot on the skin microbiome, a lot of my talks, interviews, and all that's related to the skin microbiomes. It's exciting to be working on the skin microbiome because the cases we've completed, the studies we've completed show very profound change to the skin in a short period of time, which means, you need less cosmetics, less harsh chemicals, things like that to try to repair the skin and so on. And it reduces stress and improves quality of life for most people, right? Everyone gets anxious if their forward-facing part of their body, which is their skin, is completely disrupted, inflamed, they have acne, all kinds of things. So it's really exciting to be able to see that we can impact people's skin, and then it improves their quality of life quite a bit.
And the last question I ask everyone who I interview for the podcast, because podcast name is Harmonic Alignment. So from you as a microbiologist, what does it mean, live in harmonic alignment?
I think the key in living in harmonic alignment is that all of the systems are aligned in place, right? We have this faulty thinking in traditional medicine that the body functions in silos, right? And I understand why medical professionals have to go that route. A cardiologist is only looking at your heart. A rheumatologist is only looking at your joints. A neurologist is only looking at your brain and central nervous system, without the idea that your heart does affect your brain, which does affect your joints, and your joints affect your heart and your brain. Everything is connected, right? So harmonic alignment to me is really about appreciating the systems biology approach to how a human is functioned, and then supporting the system, knowing that it's all connected. And just because you have an issue here doesn't mean the issue originated here. It could originate somewhere else, right? So that to me is really important, absorbing and assimilating this idea of systems biology and ensuring we are doing things that support the entire system and not just the one area that we may be concerned about.
Thank you, Kiran, for your wisdom. I know you have a lot of interesting things that we can talk forever, but our time is short, so maybe we'll invite you for a future presentation and lectures. So thank you very much.
It's my pleasure. I'll be happy to come on again. There's endless things to talk about. Thank you so much for having me.
We are so excited today to share with you one of our favorite new products to help your skin optimize. Discover the next generation of skincare with Civ Biome Balancing Serum, a groundbreaking spore-based formula designed to harmonize your unique skin microbiome. Powered by advanced quorum sensing technology, this innovative serum restores balance and promotes resilience from within, adapting to your skin's natural biology for a healthier, more resilient barrier. By establishing a strong, balanced foundation, it revitalizes your skin and enhances its natural beauty. Experience the power and harmony with your skin and transform your routine with Civ Biome Balancing Serum. Available at sivcare.com, civcare.com. Are you ready for your Energy for Life bioenergetic nest scan? Dr. Larisa Sharipova and myself, Priscilla Koblenz, offer personal, private, 90-minute consults to get you back to optimal health and well-being. And starting in the new year, we're offering an Energy Mastery Program, a monthly membership which will give you access to a monthly scan as well as 2 group masterclasses to help you optimize your wellness in the new year. For more details, visit the show notes or check out harmonicalignment.co. We hope you enjoyed today's episode of Harmonic Alignment. If something resonated with you, we would love to hear about it. Please consider leaving us a 5-star review and subscribing so you don't miss an upcoming episode. Thank you. The information contained in this podcast is provided for informational purposes only and not intended for the purpose of diagnosing, treating, curing, or preventing any disease. Before using any products referenced on the podcast, consult with your healthcare provider. Carefully read all labels and directions. The products and information received through the podcast should not be used to replace a consultation or advice from your healthcare provider. If you suspect you have a medical problem or have any healthcare questions, please promptly call your healthcare provider. This podcast, including Dr. Larisa Sharipova and Priscilla Koblenz and the producers, are not responsible for any possible adverse effects from the use of information contained in this podcast. This podcast may contain endorsements and advertisements for products or services. Individuals on this podcast may have a direct financial benefit to the product or services referenced.